Maybe. Yeah. Hello. Um, yeah, we started reading Dracula. We did chapter 1. Hi. Hi, it takes all grinds. How's it going? Are you guys ready? Are you guys ready to learn about Dracula? Hello. Yeah, we didn't we didn't get very far. I'm good. Yeah. Had a busy day, and I have fixed my audio issue so that I can't hear myself through my own headphones. So that's exciting. That's really good for me. Um, I'm excited about that. Before we get started, I'm going to read off some of the follows that we got between yesterday and today. We got several actually. Um, where did I leave off? Okay. It's Itsune. Welcome to the library. Thank you for the follow. Oh boy, I am definitely going to butcher this one, and I am so sorry. Uh, Hinagiku Nezuchi. Thank you for the follow. Um, Tanaka Uta. Thank you for the follow. Tech Dragon Z. Thank you for the follow. Sheepish June. Thank you. Lotus Mimosa. Thank you very much. Great Grass Dragon. I love your name. Thank you for the follow. Uh, Kasaki-sama. Thank you for the follow. Darth Karan. Thank you for the follow. Love your Star Wars name. And finally, M. Corby Day. Thank you for the follow. Okay. Um. Oh, thanks. Thanks, Debbie. I haven't posted anything yet, but I do plan on making some either making like just regular content on TikTok or just chopping up um bits of my streams and posting them to TikTok. Um, I haven't I haven't decided exactly what I'm going to be doing on TikTok, but I thank you for following me on TikTok. I appreciate that. Um, so yeah, our okay, yeah. I'll check out your terrible videos. I'm sure that they aren't as bad as uh they aren't as bad as you think, because most people are their own worst critics. So, but yeah, I will check that out. Um, okay. I think I'll start with a bit of a bit of recap for those of you who weren't here last time. But basically, we just started um, Jonathan Harker or Harkness. Um, I forget the dude's name, which is Harker's. Yeah. Jonathan Harker has taken a trip. Um, he's basically acting as like a real estate agent for Dracula. Um, he has traveled from London to Pennsylvania to seal the deal on Dracula buying real estate in England, which I'm sure is going to go super well. Uh, it's just the best idea England has ever had, letting Dracula into their midst. Um, and he, along his journey, he meets a ton of locals, and they're all like, "Dude, do not go to where you're going." Yeah, Dracula's just a nice old man. What could possibly go wrong? Um, all of the people that he meets are just like giving him crucifixes and crosses, and they cross themselves whenever he tells them, or whenever they learn where he's going. Um, and Harker is just like, yeah, I'm sure that's fine. That's, it's kind of concerning, but you know, I'm sure Dracula is a total stand-up guy. Um, and then we met Dracula, and he's a bit of a creep, a little bit. But he seems pretty nice so far, actually. We haven't gotten very far yet, but he offers Harker this really nice bedroom with a yeah, he throws killer parties. Yeah, that's the word for it. Um, he he offers them this really nice room to stay in, and he tells him that you must you had a long journey. You must need to make a toilet, which I assume means take a shit. Because what else would it mean? So yeah, they've had dinner now. Harker has gone to the bathroom, and we've we are now on the 7th of May. So let's begin. 7 May. It is again early morning, but I have rested and enjoyed the last 24 hours. I slept till late in the day and awoke of my own accord. When I had dressed myself, I went into the room where we had supped, and found a cold breakfast laid out, with coffee kept hot by the pot being placed on the hearth. There was a card on the table on which was written, "I have been absent for a while. Do not wait for me. I have to be absent for a while. Do not wait for me. D." I set to and enjoyed a hearty meal. When I had done, I looked for a bell so I might let the servants know I had finished, but I could not find one. There are certainly odd deficiencies in this house, considering the extraordinary evidences of wealth which are around me. The table service is of gold, and so beautifully wrought that it must be of immense value. The curtains of upholstery of the curtains and sofas and the hangings of my bed are of the costliest and most beautiful fabrics, and must have been of fabulous value when they were made, for they are centuries old, though in excellent order. I saw something like them in Hampton Court, but there they were worn and frayed and moth-eaten. But still in none of the rooms is there a mirror. There is not even a toilet glass on my table, and I had to get the little shaving glass from my bag before I could even either shave or brush my hair. I have not yet seen a servant anywhere, or heard a sound near the castle, except the howling of wolves. Some time after I had finished my meal, I do not know whether to call it breakfast or dinner, for it was between 5 and 6 o'clock when I had it. I looked about for something to read, for I did not like to go about the castle until I had asked the Count's permission. There was absolutely nothing in the room. Books, newspaper, or even writing materials. So I opened another door in the room and found a sort of library. The door opposite mine I tried, but found it locked. In the library I found, to my great delight, a vast number of English books, whole shelves full of them, and bound volumes of magazines and newspapers. A table in the center was littered with English magazines and newspapers, though none of them were of very recent date. The books were of the most varied kind: history, geography, politics, political economy, botany, geology, law, all relating to England and English life, and customs and manners. There were even such books of reference as the London Directory, the Red and Blue books, Whitaker's Almanac, the Army and Navy lists, and it somehow gladdened my heart to see it, the Law list. I'm just going to pause for a second. If someone has a list of describing the English Army and Navy, I'm gonna say that's a red flag. Like, that's just not a good sign. Harker, you're an idiot. Whilst I was looking at the books, the door opened, and the Count entered. He saluted me in a hearty way, and hoped that I had a good night's rest. Then he went on. I am glad you found your way in here, for I am sure there is much that will interest you. These companions, and he laid his hand on some of the books, have been good friends to me. And for some years past, ever since I had the idea of going to London, have given me many, many hours of pleasure. Through them I have come to know your great England, and to know her is to love her. I long to go through the crowded streets of your mighty London, to be in the midst of the whirl and rush of humanity, to share its life, its change, its death, and all that makes it what it is. But alas, as yet I only know your tongue through books. To you, my friend, I look that I know to speak it. But Count, I said, you know and speak English thoroughly. He bowed gravely. I thank you, friend, for your all too flattering estimate, but I yet fear that I am but a little way on the road I would travel. True, I know the grammar and the words, but yet I know not how to speak them. Indeed, I said, you speak excellently. Not so, he said. Well, I know that, did I move and speak in your London. None there are who would know me for a stranger. That is enough for me. That is not enough for me. Here I am, noble. I am boyar. The common people know me, and I am master. But a stranger in a strange land, he is no one. Men know him not, and to know not is to care not for. I am content if I am like the rest, so... Hello. How's it going? How's it going, Tanaka? We're just learning how Dracula is trying to assimilate into English culture and learn their language. I am content if I am like the rest, so that no man stops if he sees me, or pause in his speaking if he hear my words. Ha ha! A stranger! Oh, cool. Thanks for stopping by. I've been so long master that I would be master still, or that it, or at least that none other should be master of me. You come to me not alone as agent of my friend Peter Hawkins of Exeter, to me all about my new estate in London. You shall, I trust, rest here with me a while, so that by our talking I may learn the English intonation, and I would that you would tell me when I make error, even of the smallest in my speaking. I am sorry that I had to be away so long today, but you will, I know, forgive one who has so many important affairs in hand. Of course, I said all I could about being willing, and asked if I might come into that room when I chose. He answered, "Yes, certainly," and added, "You may go anywhere you wish in the castle, except where the doors are locked, where of course you will not wish to go. There is reason that all things are as they are, and did you see with my eyes, and know with my knowledge, you would perhaps better understand." I said I was sure of this, and then he went on, "We are in Transylvania, and Transylvania is not England. Our ways are not your ways, and there shall be to you many strange things. Nay, from what you have told me of your experiences already, you know something of what strange things there may be." This led to much conversation, and as it was evident that he wanted to talk, if only for talking's sake, I asked him many questions regarding that had already happened, things that had already happened to me or come within my notice. Sometimes he sheered off that subject or turned the conversation by pretending not to understand, but generally he answered all I asked, most frankly. Then, as time went on, and I had got somewhat bolder, I asked him of some of the strange things of the preceding night, as, for instance, why the coachman went to the places where he had seen the blue flames. He then explained to me that it was commonly believed that on a certain night of the year, last night in fact, when all evil spirits are supposed to be have unchecked sway, a blue flame is seen over any place where treasure has been concealed. That treasure has been hidden, he went on, in the region through which you came last night. There can be but little doubt, for it was the ground fought over for centuries by the Wallachians, the Saxon, and the Turks. Why, there is hardly a foot of soil in all this region that has not been enriched by the blood of men, patriots, or invaders. In old days, there were stirring times when the Austrian and the Hungarian camp up in hordes, and the patriots went out to meet them, men and women, the aged and the children too, and waited their coming on the rocks above the passes, that they might sweep destruction on them with their artificial avalanches. When the invader was triumphant, he found but little, for whatever there was had been sheltered in the friendly soil. But how, I said, can it be? Can it have remained so long undiscovered, when there is sure an index to it if men will but take the trouble to look." The Count smiled, and his lips ran back over his gums. The long, sharp canine teeth showed out strangely. He answered, "Because your peasant is at heart a coward and a fool. Those flames only appear on one night, and on that night no man of this land will, if he can help it, stir without his doors. And, dear sir, even if he did, he would not know what to do. Why, even the peasant that you told me of, who marked the place of the flame, would not know where to look in the daylight, even for his own work. Even you would not, I dare be sworn, be able to find these places again." "There you are right," I said. "I know no more than the dead where even to look for them." Then we drifted into other matters. "Come," he said at last, "tell me of London, and of the house which you have procured for me." With an apology for my remissness, I went into my own room to get the papers from my bag. Whilst I was placing them in order, I heard a rattling of china and silver in the next room, and as I passed through, I noticed that the table had been cleared, and the lamp lit, for it was by this time deep into the dark. The lamps were also lit in the study or library, and I found the Count lying on the sofa, reading, of all things in the world, an English Bradshaw's Guide. When I came in, he cleared the books and papers from the table, and with him I went into plans and deeds and figures of all sorts. He was interested in everything, and asked me a myriad questions about the place and its surroundings. He clearly had studied beforehand all he could get on the subject of the neighborhood, for he evidently, at the end, knew very much more than I did. "Then what is your purpose, Harker? What is the point of you?" When I remarked this, he answered, "Well, but, my friend, is it not needful that I should? When I go there, I shall be all alone. And my friend Harker, Jonathan, nay, pardon me, I fall into my country's habit of putting your father's name first. My friend Jonathan Harker will not be by my side to correct and aid me. He will be in Exeter, miles away, probably working at papers of the law with my other friend, Peter Hawkins. So we went thoroughly into the business of the purchase of the estate at Purfleet. When I had told him the facts and got his signature to the necessary papers, and had written a letter with them ready to post to Mr. Hawkins, he began to ask me how I came across so suitable a place. I read to him the notes which I had made at the time, and which I inscribe here. At Purfleet, on a by-road, I came across just such a place as seemed to be required, and where was displayed a dilapidated notice that the place was for sale. It is surrounded by a high wall of ancient structure, built of heavy stones, and has not been repaired for a large number of years. The closed gates are of heavy oak and iron, all eaten with rust. The estate is called Carfax. Anybody know Carfax? What it is now? The commercials. Anyway, the estate is called Carfax. no doubt a corruption of the old quarterface, the house is four-sided, agreeing with the cardinal points of the compass. It contains in all some 20 acres, quite surrounded by the solid stone wall above mentioned. There are many trees on it, which make it in places gloomy, and and there is a deep, dark-looking pond or small lake, evidently fed by some springs, as the water is clear and flows away in a fair-sized stream. The house is very large and of all periods back. I should say to medieval times, for one part is of stone immensely thick, and with only a few windows high up, and heavily barred with iron. It looks like a part of a keep, but is close to an old chapel or church. I could not enter it, as I had not the key of the door leading to it from the house. But I have taken with my Kodak views of it from various points. The house has been added to, but in a very straggling way, and I can only guess at the amount of ground it covers, which must be very great. There are but few houses close at hand, one being a very large house, only recently added to and formed into a private lunatic asylum. It is not, however, visible from the grounds. When I had finished, he said, "I am glad that it is old and big. I myself am of an old family, and to live in a new house would kill me. A house that cannot be made habitable in a day, and after all, how few days go to make up a century. I rejoice also that there is a chapel of the old times. We Transylvanian nobles love not to think that our bones may lie amongst the common dead. I seek not gaiety nor mirth, not the bright voluptuousness of much sunlight and sparkling waters, which please the young and gay. I am no longer young, and my heart, through weary years of mourning over the dead, is not attuned to mirth. Moreover, the walls of my castle are broken, the shadows are many, and the wind breathes cold through the broken battlements and casements. I love the shade and the shadow, and would be alone with my thoughts when I may." Somehow his words and his look did not seem to accord, or else it was that his cast of face made his smile look malignant and saturnine. Presently, with an excuse, he left me, asking me to put all my papers together. He was some little time away, and I began to look at some of the books around me. One was an atlas, which I found opened naturally at England, as if that map had been used much. On looking at it, I found in certain places little rings marked, and on examining these I noticed that one was near London, on the east side, manifestly where his new estate was situated. The other two were Exeter and Whitby, on the Yorkshire coast. It was the better part of an hour when the Count returned. "Aha!" he said. "Still at your books? Good. But you must not work always. Come, I am informed that your supper is ready." He took my arm, and we went into the next room, where I found an excellent supper ready on the table. The Count again excused himself, as he had dined out on his being away from home. But he sat as on the previous night, and chatted whilst I ate. After supper I smoked, as on the last evening, and the Count stayed with me, chatting and asking questions on every conceivable subject, hour after hour. I felt that it was getting very late indeed, but I did not say anything, for I felt under obligation to meet my host's wishes in every way. I was not sleepy, as the long sleep yesterday had fortified me, but I could not help experiencing that chill which comes over one at the coming of dawn, which is like, in its way, the turn of the tide. They say that people who are near death die generally at the to the dawn, or at the turn of the tide. Anyone who has, when tried, anyone who has when tired, and tied it, as it were, to his post, experienced this change in the atmosphere, can well believe it. All at once we heard the crow of a rooster coming up with preternatural shrillness through the clear morning air. Count Dracula, jumping to his feet, said, "Why, there is the morning again. How remiss I am that to let you stay up so long. You must make your conversation regarding my dear new country of England less interesting, so that I may not forget how the time flies between us." And with a courtly bow, he quickly left me. Super sus. Super sus. I went into my own room and drew the curtains, but there was little to notice. My window opened into a courtyard. All I could see was the warm gray of the quickening sky. So I pulled the curtains again and have written of this day. It's fine. I'm sure he's totally trustworthy. It's fine, guys. May 8th. I begin to fear, as I wrote in this book, that I was getting too diffuse, but now I am glad that I went into detail from the first, for there is something so strange about this place and all in it that I cannot but feel uneasy. Yes, this goes super well in Siddlem's Lot. Yes. I wish I were safe of it. I were safe out of it, or that I had never come. But I'm. It may be that this strange night existence is telling on me. But would that were all that. But would that were all. If there were anyone to talk to, I could bear it. But there is no one. I have only the Count to speak with, and he, I fear I am myself the only living soul within the place. Let me be prosaic so far as facts can be. It will help me to bear up, and imagination must not run riot with me. If it does, I am lost. Let me say at once how I stand or seem to. I only slept a few hours when I went to bed, and finally I could not sleep, and feeling that I could not sleep any more, got up. I had hung my shaving glass by the window, and was beginning to shave. Suddenly, I felt a hand on my shoulder, and heard the Count's the Count's voice saying to me, "Good morning." I started, for it amazed me that I had not seen him. since the reflection of the glass covered the whole room behind me. In starting, I had cut myself slightly, but did not notice it at the moment. Having answered the Count's salutation, I turned the glass again to see how I had been mistaken. This time there could be no error, for the man was close to me, and I could see him over my shoulder. But there was no reflection of him in the mirror. The whole room behind me was displayed, but there was no sign of the man in it, except myself. This was startling, and coming on top of so many strange things, was beginning to increase that vague feeling of uneasiness which I always had when the Count is near. But at that instant I saw that the cut I had bled a little, and the blood was trickling over my chin. I laid down the razor, turning as I did half around to look for some sticking plaster. When the Count saw my face, his eyes blazed with a sort of demonic fury, and he suddenly made a grab at my throat. I drew away, and his hand touched the string of beads which held the crucifix. It made an instant change in him, for the fury passed so quickly that I could hardly believe that it was even there. "Take care," he said. "Take care how you cut yourself. It is more dangerous than you think in this country." Then, seizing the shaving glass, he went on, "And this is the wretched thing that has done the mischief. It is a foul bauble of man's vanity. Away with it!" And opening the heavy window with one wrench of his terrible hand, he flung out the glass, which was shattered into 1,000 pieces on the stones in the courtyard far below. Then he withdrew without a word. It is very annoying, for I do not see how I am to shave unless in my watch case or the bottom of the shaving pot, which is fortunately of metal. When I went into the dining room, breakfast was prepared, but I could not find the Count anywhere. So I had breakfasted alone. It is strange that as yet I have not seen the Count eat or drink. He must be a very peculiar man. After breakfast, I did a little exploring in the castle. I went out on the stairs and found a room looking towards the south. The view was magnificent, and from where I stood, there was every opportunity of seeing it. The castle was on the very edge of a terrible precipice. A stone falling from the window would fall 1,000 feet without touching anything. As far as the eye can see the eye can reach is a sea of green treetops, with occasionally a deep rift where there is a chasm. Here and there are silver threads where the rivers wind in deep gorges through the forests. But I am not in heart to describe beauty. For when I had seen the view, I explored further. Doors everywhere, and all locked and bolted. In no place save from the windows in the castle walls is there an available exit. The castle is a veritable prison, and I am a prisoner. Uh-oh. That's not good. Chapter 3. Jonathan Harker's Journal. Continued. When I found that I was a prisoner of sorts, a sort of wild feeling came over me. I rushed up and down the stairs, trying every door and peering out every window that I could find. But after a little, the conviction of my helplessness overpowered all the other feelings. When I look back after a few hours, I think I must have been mad for the time, for I behaved much as a rat does in a trap. When, however, the conviction had come to me that I was helpless, I sat down quietly as I have ever done anything in my life, and began to think over what was best to be done. I am thinking still, and as yet I've come to no definite conclusion. Of one thing only I am certain, that it is no use making my ideas known to the Count. He knows well that I am imprisoned, and he has done it himself, and has doubtless his own motivations for it. He would only deceive me if I trusted him fully with the facts. So far as I can see, my only plan will be to keep my knowledge and my fears to myself, and my eyes open. I know, either being deceived like a baby by my own fears, or else I am in desperate straits. And if the latter be so, I need and shall need all my brains to get through. I had hardly come to this conclusion when I heard the great door below shut, and knew that the Count had returned. He did not come at once to the library, so I went cautiously to my own room and found him making the bed. This was odd, but only confirmed what I had all along thought. There were no servants in the house. When later I saw him through the chink of the hinges of the door laying the table in the dining room, I was assured of it. For if he does himself all these menial offices, surely it is proof that there is no one else to do them. This gave me a fright, for if there was no one else in the castle, it must have been the Count himself, who was the driver of the coach that brought me here. This is a terrible thought, for if so, what does it mean that he could control the wolves, as he did, by only holding up his hand in silence? How was it that all the people at Bistritz had on the coach some terrible fear for me? What meant the giving of the crucifix, of the garlic, of the wild rose, of the mountain ash? Bless that good woman who hung the crucifix round my neck, for it is a comfort and a strength to me whenever I touch it. It is odd that a thing which I have been taught to regard with disfavor and as idolatrous should, in a time of loneliness and trouble, be of help. Is it that there is something in the essence of the thing itself, or that it is a medium, a tangible help, in conveying memories of sympathy and comfort? Sometime, if it may be, I must examine this matter and try to make up my mind about it. In the meantime, I must find out all I can about Count Dracula, as it may help me to understand. Tonight he may talk of himself, if I turn the conversation that way. I must be very careful, however, not to awake his suspicion. Midnight. I have had a long talk with the Count. I asked him a few questions on Transylvanian history, and he warmed me up to the subject wonderfully. In his speaking of things and people, and especially of battles, He spoke as if he had been present at all of them. This he afterwards explained by saying that to a boyar, the pride of his house and his name is his own pride, that their glory is his glory, that their fate is his fate. Whenever he spoke of his house, he always said we, and spoke almost in the plural, like a king speaking. I wish I could put down all that he said exactly as he said it, for to me it was most fascinating. It seemed to have in it a whole history of the country. He grew excited as he spoke, and walked about the room pulling his great white mustache, and grasping anything on which he laid his hands as though he would crush it by main strength. One thing he said, which I shall put down as nearly as I can, for it tells in its way the story of his race. We, Sekels, have a right to be proud, for in our veins flows the blood of many races. Oh, thank you for the raid, Cat the Cheshire Mouse. Thank you very much. I hope you had a good stream. What were you playing? And welcome everyone. I'm Emrys, the Fae Librarian, and I'm doing a reading of Dracula. Oh, cool. Yeah, I've never. Well, actually, I've seen. I've had friends who played the Tales series in high school, and I got to see them play some of it, but I actually never played it myself. I've heard it's really good though. So we've gotten to the part where Jonathan Harker is somewhat distrusting of Dracula, and he is starting to notice all of his like many odd qualities. So he's starting to get smarter and realizing that he is a prisoner in Dracula's castle, and Dracula is being a bit sus. So yeah, thank you again for the raid, and I hope everyone sticks around to find out what happens next. We have a right to be proud, for in our veins flows the blood of many brave races who fought as the lion fights for lordship. Here in the whirlpool of European races, the Ugric tribe bore down from Iceland the fighting spirit which Thor and Woden gave them, which their berserkers displayed to such fell intent on the seaboards of Europe, aye, and of Asia and Africa too, till the peoples thought that the werewolves themselves had come. Here too, when they came, they found the Huns, whose warlike fury had swept the earth like a living flame, till the dying peoples held that in their veins ran the blood of those old witches who expelled from Scythia had mated with the devils in the desert. Fools, fools! What devil or what witch was ever so great as Attila, whose blood is in these veins? He held up his arms. It is a wonder that we are a conquering race. Thank you, Zombro, for the follow. Thank you very much, and welcome to the library. Is it a wonder that we are a conquering race? That we are proud? That when the Magyar, the Lombard, the Avar, the Bulgar, and or the Turk poured his thousands on our frontiers, we drove them back? Is it strange that when Arpad and his legions swept through the Hungarian fatherland, he found us here when he reached the frontier? That the Hanfoglalas was completed there, and when the Hungarian flood swept eastward, that we uh, that we were claimed as kindred by the victorious Magyars. By the victorious Magyars, and to us for centuries was trusted the guarding of the frontier of the Turkey land. Aye, and more than that, endless duty of the frontier guard. For, as the Turks say, water sleeps, and enemy is sleepless. Who more gladly than we throughout the four nations received the bloody sword, or at its warlike call flocked quicker to the standard of the king? Thank you, Zombie Bro. I appreciate that. When was redeemed that great shame of my nation, the shame of Kosova? When the flags of the Wallach and the Magyar went down beneath the crescent, who was it but one of my own race, who at Voivode crossed the Danube and beat the Turk on his own ground? This was a Dracula indeed. Woe was it that his own unworthy brother, when he had fallen, sold his people to the Turk, and brought the shame of slavery on them. Was it not this Dracula indeed who inspired that other of his race, who in that a later age again and again brought his forces over the great river into a Turkey land, who, when he was beaten back, came again and again and again, though he had to come alone from the bloody field where his troops were being slaughtered, since he knew that he alone could ultimately triumph. They said that he thought only of himself. Bah! What good are peasants without a leader? What ends the war without a brain and heart to conduct it? Again, when after the battle of Moax, we threw off the Hungarian yoke, we of the Dracula blood were amongst their leaders, for our spirit would not brook that we were not free. Ah, young sir, the Sekils and the Dracula as their heart's blood, their brains and their swords, can boast a record that mushroom growths that like the Habsburgs and the Romanovs can never reach. The warlike days are over. The blood is too precious a thing in these days of dishonorable peace, and the glories of the great races are as a tale that is told. It was by this time close to morning, and we went to bed. Memo. This diary seems horribly like the beginning of the Arabian Nights, for everything as to break off at cockcrow morning, or like the ghost of Hamlet's father. May 12th. Dracula seems kind of full of himself. You know, he he likes his family. 12 May. Let me begin with facts. Bare, meager facts. Verified by books and figures, and of which there can be no doubt. I must not confuse them with experiences which will have to rest on my own observation, or my memory of them. Last evening, when the Count came from his room, he began by asking me questions on legal matters, and on the doing of certain kinds of business. I had spent the day wearily over books, and simply to keep my mind occupied, went over some of the matters I had been examined at Lincoln's Inn. There was a certain method in the Count's inquiries, so I shall try to put them down in sequence. The knowledge may somehow or sometime be of use to me. First, he asked if a man in England might have 2 solicitors or more. I told him he might have a dozen if he wished, but that it would not be wise to have more than one solicitor engaged in one transaction, as only one could act at a time, and that to change would be certain to militate against his interest. I believe that a solicitor is a lawyer, basically. He seemed thoroughly to understand, and went on to ask if there would be any practical difficulty in having one man to attend, say, to banking, and another to look after shipping, in case local help were needed in a place far from the home of the banking solicitor. I asked him to explain more fully, and say that I might not by any chance mislead him. So he said, I shall illustrate. Your friend and mine, Mr. Peter Hawkins, from under the shadow of your beautiful cathedral at Exeter, which is far from London, buys for me, through your good self, my place at London. Good. Now here let me say frankly, lest you should think it strange that I have sought the services of one so far off from London, instead of some one resident there, that my motive was that no local interest might be served save my wish only. And as one of London residents might perhaps have some purpose for himself or a friend to serve, I went thus afield to seek my agent, whose labors should be only to my interest. Now, suppose I, who have much of affairs, wish to ship goods, say, to Newcastle, or Durham, or Harwich, or Dover. Might it not be that it could with more ease be done by consigning to one of these in these ports? I answered that certainly it would be most easy, but that we solicitors had a system of agency, one for the other, so that local work could be done locally, on instruction from any solicitor, so that the client, simply placing himself in the hands of one man, could have his wishes carried out by him without further trouble. But, he said, I could be at liberty to direct myself. Is it not so? Of course, I replied, and such is often done by men of business, who do not like the whole of their affairs to be known by any one person. Good, he said, and then went on to ask about the means of making consignments and the forms to be gone through, and of all sorts of difficulties which might arise, but by forethought could be guarded against. I explained all of these things to him to the best of my ability, and he certainly left me under the impression that he would have made a wonderful solicitor, for there was nothing that he did not think of or foresee. For a man who was never in the country, and who did not evidently do much in the way of business, his knowledge and acumen were wonderful. When he had satisfied himself on these points of which he had spoken, and I had verified all as well as I could by the books available, he suddenly stood up and said, "Have you written since your first letter to our friend Mr. Peter Hawkins, or to any other?" It was with some bitterness in my heart that I answered that I had not, and that as yet I had not seen any opportunity of sending letters to anybody. "Then write now, my young friend," he said, laying a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Write to your friend and to any other, and say, if it will please you, that you shall stay with me until a month from now." Do you wish me to stay so long?" I asked, for my heart grew cold at the thought. "I desire it much. Nay, I will take no refusal. When your master, employer, what you will, engaged that someone should come on his behalf, it was understood that my needs only were to be consulted. I have not stinted, is it not so? What could I do but bow acceptance? It was Mr. Hawkins' interest, not mine, and I had to think of him, not myself. And besides, while Count Dracula was speaking, there was that in his eyes, and in his bearing, which made me remember that I was a prisoner, and that if I wished it, I could have no choice. The Count saw his victory in my bow, and his mastery in the trouble of my face, for he began at once to use them, but in his own smooth, resistless way. I pray you, my good young friend, that you will not discourse of things other than business in your letters. It will doubtless please your friends to know that you are well, and that you look forward to getting home to them, is it not so?" As he spoke, he handed me 3 sheets of notepaper and 3 envelopes. They were all of the thinnest foreign post, and looking at them, then at him, and noticing his quiet smile with the sharp canine teeth lying over red underlip, I understood as well as if he had spoken that I should be careful what I wrote, for he would be able to read it. So I determined to write only formal notes now, and to write fully to Mr. Hawkins in secret, and also to Mina, for to her I could write in shorthand, which would puzzle the Count, if he did see it. When I had written my 2 letters, I sat quiet, reading a book, whilst the Count wrote several notes, referring as he wrote them to some books on his table. Then he took up my 2 and placed them with his own, and put by his writing materials, after which, the instant the door had closed behind him, I leaned over and looked at the letters, which were face down on the table. I felt no compunction in doing so, for under the circumstances I felt that I should protect myself in any way I could. I find it I find it fascinating how just a master of manipulation Dracula is. He it's like it's basically manipulation 101. You you get the person alone, and make it so that they have to go through you to communicate with anyone. And you make sure that they are isolated from everyone. And it's just, it's rough. Um, anyway, sorry. I'll continue. One of the letters was directed to Samuel F. Billington. Number 7, The Crescent, Whitby. Another to Air Lutner, Varna. The third was to Coutts and Company, London. And the fourth to Heron Klopstock and Billruth, bankers, Budapest. The second and fourth were unsealed. I was just about to look at them when I saw the door handle move, and I sank back in my seat, having just had time to replace the letters as they had been, and to resume my book before the Count, holding still another letter in his hand, entered the room. He took up the letters on the table and stamped them carefully, and then, turning to me, said, "I trust you will forgive me, but I have much work to do in private this evening. You will, I hope, find all things as you wish." And at the door he turned, and after a moment's pause said, "Let me advise you, my dear young friend, nay, let me warn you with all seriousness, that should you leave these rooms, you will not, by any chance, go to sleep in any other part of the castle. It is old and has many memories, and there are bad dreams for those who sleep unwisely. Be warned, should sleep now or ever overcome you, or be like to do, then haste to your own chamber, or to these rooms, for your rest will be then safe. But if you be not careful in this respect, then..." He finished his speech in a gruesome way, for he motioned his hand as if he were washing them. I quite understood. My only doubt was as to whether any dream could be more terrible than the unnatural, horrible net of gloom and mystery which seemed closing around me. Later. I endorsed the last words written, but this time there is no doubt in question. I shall not fear to sleep in any place where he is not. I have placed the crucifix over the head of my bed. I imagine that my rest is thus freer from dreams, and there it shall remain. When he left me, I went to my room. After a little while, not hearing any sound, I came out and went up the stone stair to where I could look out towards the south. There was some sense of freedom in the vast expanse, inaccessible though it was to me, as compared with the narrow darkness of the courtyard. Looking out of this, I felt that I was indeed in prison, and I seemed to want a breath of fresh air, though it were of the night. I am beginning to feel this nocturnal existence tell on me. It is destroying my nerve. I start I start at my own shadow, and I am full of sorts of horrible imaginings. God knows that there is ground for my terrible fear in this accursed place. I look out over the beautiful expanse, bathed in yellow and soft yellow moonlight, till it was almost as light as day. In the soft light, the distant hills became melted, and the shadows in the valley and gorges of velvety blackness. The mere beauty seemed to cheer me. There was peace and comfort in every breath I drew. As I leaned from the window, my eye was caught by something moving a story below me, and somewhat to my left, where I imagined from the from the order of the rooms, that the windows of Dracula's own room, of the Count's own room, would look out. The window at which I stood was tall and deep, stone mullioned, and though weather-worn was still complete. But it was evidently many a day since the case had been there. I drew back behind the stonework and looked carefully out. What I saw was the Count's head coming out from the window. I did not see the face, but I knew the man by the neck and the movement of his back and arms. In any case, I could not mistake the hands, which I had had so many opportunities of studying. I was at first interested and somewhat amused, for it is wonderful how small a matter will interest and amuse a man when he is a prisoner. But my very feelings changed to repulsion and terror when I saw the whole man slowly emerge from the window and begin to crawl down the castle wall over that dreadful abyss, face down, with his cloak spreading out around him like great wings. At first, I could not believe my eyes. I thought it some trick of the moonlight, some weird effect of shadow. But I kept looking, and it could be no delusion. I saw the fingers and toes grasp the corners of the stones, worn clear of the mortar by the stress of years, and thus, using every projection and inequality, moved downwards with considerable speed, just as a lizard moves along the wall. What manner of man is this? Or what manner of creature is this? Is it in a semblance of a man? I feel the dread of this horrible place overpowering me. I am in fear, in awful fear, and there is no escape for me. I am encompassed about with terrors that I dare not think of. Uh-oh. You done fucked up, Jonathan Harker. May 15th. Once more have I seen the Count go out in his lizard fashion. The Count is a lizard man. Oh no. He's a lizard person. Sorry. Once more have I seen the Count go out in his lizard fashion. He moved downwards in a sidelong way, some 100 feet down, and a good deal to the left. He vanished into some hole or window. When his head had disappeared, I leaned out to try and see more, but without avail. The distance was too great to allow a proper angle of sight. I knew he had left the castle now, and thought to use the opportunity to explore more than I had dared to do so yet. I went back to the room and, taking a lamp, tried all the doors. They were all locked, and as I had expected, and the locks were comparatively new. But I went down the stone stairs. Hey, Aylin Penrose, how's it going? I'm good. I'm good. We're we've just found out that Dracula is not exactly human. He likes to go out for walks by climbing down the walls of his castle. So Jonathan Harker is somewhat concerned about his safety. Uh, Mind blown. Yeah, exactly. Uh, I tried all the doors. They were all locked, as I had expected, and the locks were comparatively new. But I went down the stone stairs to the hall where I had originally entered. I found I could pull back the bolts easily enough and unhook the great chains, but the door was locked and the key was gone. That key must be in the Count's room. I must I must watch should his door be unlocked, so that I may get it and escape. I went on to make a thorough examination of the various stairs and passages, and to try the doors that opened from them. One or two small rooms near the hall were open, but there was nothing in them to see in them except old furniture, dusty with age and moth-eaten. At last, however, I found one door at the top of the stairway, which, though it seemed to be locked, gave under a little pressure. I tried it harder and found that it was not really locked, but that the resistance came from the fact that the hinges had fallen somewhat, and the heavy door rested on the floor. Here was an opportunity which I might not have again, so I exerted myself, and with many efforts forced it back so that I could enter. I was now in a wing of the castle further to the right than the rooms I knew, and a story lower down. From the windows, I could see that the suite of rooms lay along the of the castle. The windows of the end room looking out both west and south. On the latter side, as well as to the former, there was a great precipice. The castle was built on the corner of a great rock, so that on three sides it was quite impregnable, and great windows were placed here where sling or bow could not reach, and consequently light and comfort impossible to a position which had to be guarded or secured. To the west was a great valley, and then, rising far away, great jagged mountain fastnesses, rising peak on peak, the sheer rocks studded with mountain ash and thorn. Whose roots clung in cracks and crevices and crannies of the stone. This was evidently the portion of the castle occupied by the ladies in bygone days, for the furniture had more air of comfort than any I had seen. The windows were curtainless, and the yellow moonlight flooding in through the diamond panes enabled one to see even colors, whilst it softened the wealth of dust which lay all over and disguised in somewhat in some measured and disguised in some measure the ravages of time and the moth. My lamp seemed to be of little effect in the brilliant moonlight, but I was glad to have it with me, for there was a dread loneliness in the place, which chilled my heart and made my nerves tremble. Still, it was better than living alone in the rooms, which I had come to hate from the presence of the Count. And after trying to a little to school my nerves, I found a soft quietude come over me. Here I am, sitting at a little oak table, where in old times possibly some fair lady sat to pen, with much thought and many blushes, her ill-spelled love letter, and writing in my diary in shorthand all that has happened since I closed it last. It is 19th century up to date, with a vengeance. And yet, unless my senses deceive me, the old centuries had and have powers of their own, which mere modernity cannot kill. Yeah, that it's interesting to think about what the reaction was to Dracula. I don't I don't know. I kind of wish I did, but um, obviously, vampires vampire myth is much older than Dracula. Um, but Dracula is obviously the beginning of what we consider the modern version of vampires. But Bram Stoker definitely had his um, sources that he pulled from, and one of the things that I think about when like analyzing Dracula is um, this is very much a story written by an English author about um, an immigrant from Eastern Europe coming in and is like a monster, and starts doing terrible things to English women and men, and it's um, there's definitely a way in which this book uh, deals with immigrants in a very like crass and awful way. But anyway, where was I? Later, the morning of 16 May. God preserve my sanity, for to this I am reduced. Safety and the assurance of safety are things of the past. Whilst I live on here, there is but one thing to hope for, that I may not go mad, if indeed I be not mad already. If I be sane, then surely it is maddening to think that all the foul things that lurk in this hateful place The Count is the least dreadful to me, that to him alone I can look for safety, even though this be only whilst I can serve his purpose. Great God, merciful God, let me be calm, for out of that way lies madness indeed. I begin to get new lights on certain things which have puzzled me. Up to now, I never quite knew what Shakespeare meant when he made Hamlet say, "My tablets, quick, my tablets! 'Tis meet that I put it down," etc. Dealing with the realities of older text, yeah, yeah. There's definitely a lot of horrific things in this book. In a lot, well, obviously a lot of text from this era about foreign individuals, about people of different races and different nationalities and all that stuff. Yeah, definitely. And it, I think, I think that there's, it's definitely, I think it's hard to understate the like the political influences in Dracula because um Dracula is Eastern European, he's foreign, he's also nobility of a kind, so he has a lot of wealth. um there's there's just a lot of things that we can dig into in Dracula. It's also if you look at how he's described physically, you you can there are certain ways in which he is coded in a lot of ways. Um, like he's coded to be Jewish in a lot of ways, and it's not a great look. Let's just say that. Um, and England has a long history of anti-Semitism. Um, so it makes sense that Dracula, this horrific monster and immigrant, would be coded in that way. Um, so yeah, not only do you get reading, but you also get the literary analysis 101. I think a lot of modern readers, yeah, oh yeah, definitely. Um, most, well, maybe not most, but like that, a lot of people, if they read a book like this, they go mostly surface level analysis. Um, they look at Dracula and say, "Oh, he's a monster." Yeah, like you know, he deserves to get staked. But they don't look at what Dracula represents. They don't analyze the text at all. Um, yeah, learning learning what authors are putting in their text and why is really important, especially when you've got some really terrible stuff in there. There's one more side tangent, and then we'll get back to this. Um, but when I used to, I taught a little bit of Dracula. Like I had students read like a section of Dracula. Um, and we, uh, yeah, epistolary novels are not a they're not a very modern way of telling a story. So it can be difficult, definitely, to for modern readers to get into a book like this. But I had I had students, and it's not really their fault. But when you try to get students to like think deeper about texts, it can be difficult for them to go any deeper than really just the surface level, or just like repeating what the teacher has said um, in their in their literary analysis. So let's just say that I had students who tried to read Dracula as like uh, as being coded as Jewish because Dracula uh, isn't Christian, and um, he hates Jesus. So it, you know, you almost got there, almost, but then you went way off the deep end and went, you know, yeah, yeah. It can definitely be a lot of the classics can be difficult reads, um, but they're really important. So you know, um, let's get back into it. We have the quote from Hamlet. I put it down, etc. For now, feeling as though my own brain were unhinged, or as if the shock had come with, uh, or if, or as if the shock had come which must end in its undoing, I turn to my diary for repose. The habit of entering accurately must help to soothe me. The Count's mysterious warning frightened me at the time. It frightens me now, me more now when I think of it. For in future he has, for in future he has a fearful hold upon me. I shall fear to doubt what he may say. Time for you to run, Harker. Run. Run as fast as you can. Jeez. Um, when I had written in my diary and had fortunately replaced the book and pen in my pocket, I felt sleepy. The Count's warning came into my mind, but I took pleasure in disobeying it. The sense of sleep was upon me, and with it uh, the obstinacy of which sleep brings as outrider. The soft moonlight soothed, and the wide expanse without gave a sense of freedom which refreshed me. I determined not to return tonight to the gloom-haunted rooms, but to sleep here, where of old ladies had sat and sung and lived sweet lives, whilst their gentle breasts were sad for their menfolk away in the midst of remorseless wars. I drew a great couch out of its place near the corner, so that as I lay, I could look at the lovely view to east and south, and uncaring for the dust, composed myself for sleep. I suppose I must have fallen asleep. I hope so, but I fear for all that followed was startlingly real. So real that now, sitting here in the broad, full sunlight of the morning, I cannot in the least believe it was all sleep. I was not alone. The room was the same, unchanged in any way since I came into it. I could see along the floor, in the brilliant moonlight, my own footsteps marked where I had disturbed the long accumulation of dust. In the moonlight opposite me were three young women, ladies by their dress and manner. I thought at the time that I must be dreaming when I saw them, for when the moonlight was behind them, they threw no shadow on the floor. They came close to me and looked at me for some time, and then whispered together. Two were dark, and had high aquiline noses, like the Count, and great dark piercing eyes, that seemed to be almost red when contrasted with the pale yellow moon. The other was fair, as fair could be, with great wavy masses of golden hair and eyes like pale sapphires. The Gary Oldman one, yeah. There's a ton of Dracula movies. The other was fair as fair can be, with great wavy masses of golden hair and eyes like pale sapphires. I seemed somehow to know her face, and to know it in connection with some dreamy fear, but I could not recollect at the moment how or where. All three had brilliant white teeth that shone like pearls against the ruby of their voluptuous lips. There was something about them that made me uneasy, some longing and at the same time some deadly fear. I felt in my heart a wicked, burning desire that they would kiss me with those red lips. It is not good to note this down, lest some day it should meet Mina's eyes, and cause her pain, but it is the truth. They whispered together, and then they all three laughed. Such a silvery, musical laugh, but as hard as though the sound never could have come through the softness of human lips. It was like the intolerable tingling sweetness of water glasses when played by a cunning hand. The fair girl shook her head coquettously. I don't know how to pronounce that word. And the other two urged her on. That's a really good movie too. By the way, before we move on, I just wanted to ask, would you guys prefer that I just I do just straight reading, just read the text and then when I'm done talk, or if something like is funny to me, or you know, whatever, or I might want to make a comment. Should I do it when I think of it? I'm I'm still trying to figure out what I like, so it kind of helps if I know what you guys want or what you guys prefer. I don't want to ruin your. Uh, okay, yeah, I don't want to like take you guys out of the experience by interrupting too much. So I guess I just need to like practice more and uh, do whatever makes me feel comfortable. But let's get back to Dracula's really hot brides. One said, "Go on. You were the first, and we shall follow. Yours is the right to begin." The other added, "He is young and strong. There are kisses for us all." I lay quiet, looking out under my eyelashes in agony of delightful anticipation. The fair girl advanced and bent over me till I could feel the movement of her breath upon me. Okay, that makes me feel a bit better. Thanks. Thanks for letting me know. Um, Movement of her breath upon me. Sweet it was in one sense, honey sweet, and sent the same tingling through the nerves of her voice, the nerves as her voice, but with it a bitter underlying, a bitter, but with a bitter underlining the sweet, a bitter offensiveness, as one smells in blood. Yeah, I know that feeling, and I'm happy to do it. I like reading out loud. I was afraid to raise my eyelids. Oh, by the way, uh, I think it's safe to say that based on based on textual evidence, Jonathan Harker has the strangest boner right now. He might be a necrophiliac. Maybe. I was afraid to raise my eyelids, but looked out and saw perfectly under the lashes. The girl went on her knees and bent over me, simply gloating. There was a deliberate voluptuousness which was both thrilling and repulsive, and as she arched her neck, she actually licked her lips like an animal, till I could see in the moonlight the moisture shining on the scarlet lips and on the red tongue as it lapped the white sharp teeth. Lower and lower went her head as the lips went below the range of my mouth and chin and seemed about to fasten on my throat. Then she paused, and I could hear the churning sound of her tongue as it licked her teeth and lips. And could feel the hot breath on my neck. Then the skin of my throat began to tingle as one's flesh did when the hand that is to tickle it approaches nearer and nearer. I could feel the soft, shivering touch of the lips on the supersensitive skin of my throat, and the hard dents of two sharp teeth, just touching and pausing there. I closed my eyes in languorous ecstasy and waited with beating heart. But at that instant, another sensation swept through me as quick as lightning. I was conscious of the presence of the Count, and of his being as if lapped in a storm of fury. As my eyes opened involuntarily, I saw his strong hand grasp the slender neck of the fair woman, and with a giant's power draw it back. The blue eyes transformed with fury, the white teeth champing with rage, and the fair cheeks blazing with passion. But the Count... Never did I imagine such wrath and fury, even to the demons of the pit. His eyes were positively blazing. The red light in them was lurid, as if the flames of hellfire blazed behind them. His face was deathly pale, and the lines of it were hard like drawn wires. The thick eyebrows that met over the nose now seemed like a heaving bar of white-hot metal. With a fierce sweep of his arm, he hurled the woman from him, then motioned to the others, as though he were beating them back. It was the same imperious gesture that I had seen used to the wolves. In a voice which, though low and almost in a whisper, seemed to cut through the air and then ring round the room, he said, "How dare you touch him, any of you? How dare you cast eyes on him when I had forbidden it? Back, I tell you all. This man belongs to me. Beware how you meddle with him, or you'll have to deal with me." The fair girl, with a laugh, turned to answer him. "You yourself never loved. You never love." On this, the other woman joined, and such a mirthless, hard, soulless laughter rang through the room that it almost made me faint to hear. It seemed like the pleasure of fiends. Then the Count turned, and after looking at my face attentively, and said it in a soft whisper, "Yes, I too can love. You yourselves can tell it from the past, is it not so? Well, now I promise you that when I am done with him, you shall kiss him at your will. Now go, go! I must waken him, for there is work to be done." "Are we to have nothing tonight?" said one of them, with a low laugh, as she pointed to the bag which he had thrown upon the floor, which moved as though there were some living thing in it. For answer, he nodded his head. One of the women jumped forward and opened it. If my ears did not deceive me, there was a gasp and a low wail, as of a half-smothered child. The women closed round, whilst I was aghast with horror. But as I looked, they disappeared. With them, the dreadful bag. There was no door near them, and they could not have passed me without my noticing. They seemed to fade into the rays of the moonlight, and pass out through the window. But for I could see outside the dim. For I could see outside the dim, shadowy forms for a moment before they entirely faded away. Then the horror overcame me, and I sank down unconscious. Chapter 4. Jonathan Harker's Journal. Continued. I awoke in my bed. If it be that I had not dreamt, the Count must have carried me here. I tried to satisfy myself on the subject, but could not arrive at any unquestionable result. To be sure, there were certain small evidences, such as that my clothes were folded and laid by in a manner which was not my habit. My watch was still unwound, and I am rigorously accustomed to wind it the last thing before going to bed, and many such details. But these things are no proof, for they may have been evidences that my mind was not as usual, and from some cause or another, I had certain been much upset. I must watch for proof. Of one thing I am glad. If it was that the Count carried me here and undressed me, he must have been hurried in his task, for my pockets are intact. I am sure this diary would have been a mystery to him, which he would not have brooked. He would have taken or destroyed it. As I look around this room, although it has been to me so full of fear, it is now a sort of sanctuary, for nothing can be more dreadful than those awful women, who are, waiting to suck my blood. 18 May. I have been down to look at that room again in the daylight, for I must know the truth. When I got to the doorway at the top of the stairs, I found it closed. It had been so forcibly driven against the jamb that part of the woodwork was splintered. I could see that the bolt of the lock had not been shot, but the door is fastened from the inside. I fear it was no dream, and must act on this surmise. 19 May. I am surely in the toils. Last night the Count asked me, in the suavest tones, to write 3 letters. One saying that my work here was nearly done, and that I should start for home within a few days. Another that I was starting on the next morning from the time of the letter, and the third that I had left the castle and arrived at Bistritz. I would fain have rebelled, but felt that in the present state of things it would be madness to quarrel openly with the Count whilst I am so absolutely in his power. And to refuse would be to excite his suspicion and to arouse his anger. He knows that I know too much, and that I must not live, lest I be dangerous to him. My only chance is to prolong my opportunities. Something may occur which will give me a chance to escape. I saw in his eyes something that gathering wrath, which was manifest when he hurled that fair woman from him. He explained to me that posts were few and uncertain, and that my writing now would ensure ease of mind to my friends, and he assured me that with so much impressiveness that he would countermand the later letters, which would be held over at Bistritz until due time, in case chance would admit of my prolonging my stay. That to oppose him would have been to create new suspicion. I therefore pretended to fall in with his views, and asked him what dates I should put on the letters. He calculated a minute, then said, the first should be June 12, the second June 19, and the third June 29. I know now that the span of my life, God help me. 28 May. There is a chance of escape, or at any rate, of being able to send word home. A band of Zignani have come to the castle and are encamped in the courtyard. These people are gypsies. Romani is the proper term. I have notes of them in my book. They are peculiar to this part of the world, though allied to the ordinary Romani all over the world. There are thousands of them in Hungary and Transylvania, who are almost outside all law. They attach themselves, as a rule, to some great noble or boyar, and call themselves by his name. They are fearless and without religion, save superstition, and they talk only their own varieties of the Romani tongue. I shall write some letters home, and shall try to get them to have them posted. I have already spoken to them through my window to begin acquaintances. They took their hats off and made obeisance, and many signs, which, however, I could not understand any more than I could their spoken language. I have written the letters. Mina's is in shorthand, and I simply ask Mr. Hawkins to communicate with her. To her I have explained my situation, but without the horrors which I may only surmise. It would shock and frighten her to death were I to expose my heart to her. Should the letters not carry, then the Count shall not yet know my secret, or the extent of my knowledge. I have given these letters. I threw them through the bars of my window with a gold piece, and made the signs I could, and made what signs I could to have them posted. The man who took them pressed them to his heart and bowed, and then put them in his cap. I could do no more. I stole back to the study and began to read. As the Count did not come in, I have written here. The Count has come. He sat down beside me and said in his smoothest voice, as he opened two letters. The Zigani have given me these, of which, though I know not whence they come, I shall, of course, take care. See? He must have looked at it. One is from you, and to my friend Peter Hawkins. The other... Here he caught sight of the strange symbols as he opened the envelope, and the dark look came into his face, and his eyes blazed wickedly. The other is a vile thing, an outrage upon friendship and hospitality. It is not signed. Well, so it cannot matter to us. And he calmly held letter and envelope in the flame of the lamp till they were consumed. Then he went on. The letter to Hawkins, that I shall of course send on, since it is yours. Your letters are sacred to me. Your pardon, my friend, that I unknowingly did break the seal. Will you not cover it again? He held out the letter to me, and with a courteous bow, handed me a clean envelope. I could only redirect it and hand it to him in silence. When he went out of the room, I could hear the key turn softly. A minute later, I went over and tried it. The door was locked. When an hour or two after, the Count came back quietly into the room, his coming awakened me, for I had gone to sleep on the sofa. He was very courteous and very cheery in his manner, and seeing that I had been sleeping, he said, "So, my friend, are you tired? Get to bed. There is the surest rest. I may not have the pleasure to talk tonight, since there are many labors to me, but you will sleep, I pray." I passed to my room and went to bed, and, strange to say, slept without dreaming. Despair has its own claims. 31 May. This morning when I woke, I thought I would provide myself with some paper and envelopes from my bag and keep them in my pocket, so that I might write in case I should get an opportunity. But again a surprise, again a shock. Every scrap of paper was gone, and with it all my notes, my memoranda, relating to railways and travel, my letter of credit, in fact, all that might be useful to me were I once outside the castle. I sat and pondered a while, and then some thought occurred to me, and I made search of my portmanteau, and in the wardrobe where I placed my clothes. The suit in which I had traveled was gone, and also my overcoat and rug. I could find no trace of them anywhere. This looked like some new scheme of villainy. 19 June. This morning, 17 June. This morning, as I was sitting on the edge of my bed, cudgeling my brains, I heard without a cracking of whips and pounding and scraping of horses' feet up the rocky path beyond the courtyard. With joy, I hurried to the window and saw drive into the yard 2 great leader wagons, each drawn by 8 sturdy horses, and at the head of each pair a Slavic, with his wide hat, great nail-studded belt, dirty sheepskin, and high boots. They had also their long staves in hand. I ran to the door, intending to descend and try to join them through the main hall, as I thought that way might be opened for them. Again a shock. My door was fastened on the outside. Eeh. Then I ran to the window and cried to them. They looked up at me stupidly and pointed, but just then the hetman of the Sagani came out, and seeing them pointing to my window, said something, at which they laughed. Henceforth no effort of mine, no piteous cry or agonized entreaty would make them even look at me. Some resolutely turned away. The leader wagons contained great square boxes with handles of thick rope. These were evidently empty by the ease with which the Slavics handled them, and by their resonance as they were roughly moved. When they were all unloaded and packed in a great heap in one corner of the yard, the Slavics were given some money by the Sagani, and spitting on it for luck, lazily went each to his horse's head. Shortly afterwards, I heard the cracking of their whips die away in the distance. 24 June, before morning. Last night the Count left me early, and locked himself in his own room. As soon as I dared, I ran up the winding stair, and looked out of the window, which opened south. I thought I would watch for the Count, for there is something going on. The Sagani are quartered somewhere in the castle, and are doing work of some kind. I know it. For now, and the for now, and then I hear a faraway muffled sound, as of mattock and spade. And whatever it is, it must be the end of some ruthless villainy. I had been at the window somewhat less than half an hour when I saw coming out of the Count's window. When I saw something coming out of the Count's window, I drew back and watched carefully, and saw the whole man emerge. It was a new shock to me to find that he had on the suit of clothes which I had worn whilst traveling here, and slung over his shoulder the terrible bag which I had seen the woman take away. There could be no doubt as to his quest, and my garb too. This, then, is his new scheme of evil, that he will allow others to see me as they think, so that he may both leave evidence that I have been seen in the towns or villages posting my own letters, and that any wickedness which he may do shall by the local people be attributed to me. It makes me rage to think that this can go on, whilst I am shut up here, a veritable prisoner, but without any that protection of the law, which is even a criminal's right and consolation. I thought I would watch for the Count's return, but for a long time sat doggedly at the window. Then I began to notice that there were some quaint little specks floating in the rays of moonlight. They were like the tiniest grains of dust, and they whirled round and gathered in clusters in a nebulous sort of way. I watched them with a sense of soothing, and a sort of calm stole over me. I leaned back in the embrasure in a more comfortable position, so that I could enjoy more fully the aerial gambling. Something made me start up, a low, piteous howling of the dogs, somewhere below in the valley, which was hidden from my sight. Louder it seemed to ring in my ears, and the floating motes of dust to take new shapes to the sound as they danced in the moonlight. I felt myself struggling to awake to some call of my instincts. Nay, my very soul was struggling, and my half-remembered sensibilities were striving to answer the call. I was becoming hypnotized. Quicker and quicker danced the dust. The moonbeams seemed to quiver as they went by me into the mass of gloom beyond. More and more they gathered, till they seemed to take dim phantom shapes. And then I started, broad awake in full possession of my senses, and ran screaming from the place. The phantom shapes, which were becoming gradually materialized from the moonbeams, were those of the 3 ghostly women to whom I was doomed. I fled and felt somewhat safer in my own room, where there was no moonlight, and where the lamp was burning brightly. When a couple of hours had passed, I heard something stirring in the Count's room. Something like a sharp wail, quickly suppressed. And then there was silence, deep, awful silence, which chilled me. With a beating heart, I tried the door, but I was locked in my prison, and could do nothing. I sat down and simply cried. As I sat, I heard a sound in the courtyard without, the agonized cry of a woman. I rushed to the window, and throwing it up, peered out between the bars. There, indeed, was a woman with disheveled hair, holding her hands over her heart as one distressed with running. She was leaning against a corner of the gateway. When she saw my face at this window, she threw herself forward and shouted in a voice laden with menace, "Monster, give Eve my child." She threw herself on her knees and, raising up her hands, cried the same words in tones which wrung my heart. Then she tore her hair and beat her breast, and abandoned herself to all the violences of extravagant emotion. Finally, she threw herself forward, and though I could not see her, I could hear the beating of her naked hands against the door. Somewhere high overhead, probably on the tower, I heard the voice of the Count calling in his harsh metallic whisper. His call seemed to be answered from far and wide by the howling of wolves. Before many minutes had passed, a pack of them poured, like a pent-up dam when liberated, through the wide entrance into the courtyard. There was no cry from the woman, and the howling of the wolves was but short, before they streamed away singingly, licking their lips. I could not pity her, for I knew now what had become of her child, and she was better dead. What shall I do? What can I do? How can I escape from this dreadful thing of night and gloom and fear? June 25, morning. No man knows, till he has suffered from the night, how sweet and dear to his heart and eye the morning can be. When the sun grew so high this morning that it struck the top of the great gateway opposite my window, the high spot which it touched seemed to me as if it dove from the arc had lighted there. My fear fell from me as if it had been a vaporous garment, which dissolved in the warmth. I must take action of some sort whilst the courage of the day is upon me. Last night, one of my post-dated letters went to post. The first of the fatal series, which is to blot out the very traces of my existence from the earth. Let me not think of it. Action. It has always been at night time that I have been molested or threatened, or in some way in danger or in fear. I have not yet seen the Count in the daylight. Can it be that he sleeps when others awake? That he may be awake whilst they sleep? If I could only get into his room. But there is no possible way. The door is always locked. No way for me. Yes, there is a way, if one dares to take it. Where his body has gone, why may not another body go? I have seen him myself crawl from his window. Why should I not imitate him and go in by his window? The chances are desperate, but my need is more desperate still. I shall risk it. At the worst, it can only be death, and a man's death is not a calf's, and the dreaded hereafter may still be open to me. God help me in my task. Goodbye, Mina, if I fail. Goodbye, my faithful friend and second father. Goodbye, all, and last of all, Mina. Same day, later. I have made the effort, and God helping me, have come safely back to this room. I must put down every detail in order. I went whilst my courage was fresh and straight to the window on the south side, and at once got outside on the narrow ledge on the narrow ledge of stone which runs around the building on this side. The stones are big and roughly cut, and the mortar has, by process of time, been washed away between them. I took off my boots and ventured out on the desperate way. I looked down once, so as to make sure that a sudden glimpse of the awful depth would not overcome me, but after that kept my eyes away from it. I knew pretty well the direction and distance of the Count's window, and made for it as well as I could, having regard to the opportunities available. I did not feel dizzy. I suppose I was too excited, and the time seemed ridiculously short, till I found myself standing on the window-sill and trying to raise up the sash. I was filled with agitation, however, when I bent down and slid feet foremost in through the window. Then I looked around for the Count, but, with surprise and gladness, made a discovery. The room was empty. It was barely furnished with odd things, which seemed to have never been used. The furniture was something the same style as that in the south rooms, and was covered with dust. I looked for the key, but it was not in the lock, and I could not find it anywhere. The only thing I found was a great heap of gold in one corner, gold of all kinds, Roman and British and Austrian and Hungarian and Greek and Turkish money, covered with a film of dust. And though it had lain long in the ground, none of it that I noticed was less than 300 years old. There were also chains and ornaments, some jeweled, but all of them old and stained. At one corner of the room was a heavy door. I tried it, for since I could not find the key of the room or the key of the outer door, which was the main object of my search, I must make further examination, for all my efforts would be in vain. It was open, and led through a stone passage to a circular stairway, which went steeply down. I descended, minding carefully where I went, for the stairs were dark, being only lit by loopholes in the heavy masonry. At the bottom there was a dark, tunnel-like passage, through which came a deathly, sickly odor, the odor of old earth, newly turned. As I went through the passage, the smell grew closer and heavier. At last I pulled open a heavy door, which stood ajar, and found myself in an old, ruined chapel, which had evidently been used as a graveyard. The roof was broken, and in two places were steps leading to vaults. But the ground had recently been dug over, and the earth placed in great wooden boxes, manifestly those which had been brought by the Slovaks. There was nobody about, and I made search for any further outlet, but there was none. Then I went over every inch of the ground, so as not to lose a chance. I went down even into the vaults, where the dim light struggled, although to do so was a dread to my very soul. Into two of these I went, but saw nothing except fragments of old coffins and piles of dust. In the third, however, I made a discovery. There, in one of the great boxes, of which there were 50 in all, on a pile of newly dug earth lay the Count. He was either dead or asleep. I could not say which, for the eyes were open and stony, but without the glassiness of death, and the cheeks had the warmth of life through all their pallor. The lips were as red as ever, but there was no sign of movement, no pulse, no breath, no beating of the heart. I bent over him and tried to find any sign of life, but in vain. He could not have lain there long, for the earthy smell would have passed away in a few hours. By the side of the box was its cover, pierced with holes here and there. Good night, Cat. Thanks for sticking around. And thanks for the raid earlier. I really appreciate it. By the side of the box was its cover, pierced with holes here and there. I thought he might have the keys on him, but when I went to search, I saw the dead eyes, and in them, dead though they were, such a look of hate, though unconscious of me or my presence, that I fled from the place, and leaving the Count's room by the window, crawled again up the castle wall. Regaining my room, I threw myself, panting, onto the bed and tried to think. Hmm. 29 June. Today is the date of my last letter, and the Count has taken steps to prove that it was genuine. For again I saw him leave the castle by the same window, and in my clothes. As he went down the wall, lizard fashion, I wished I had a gun or some lethal weapon that I might destroy him, but I fear that no weapon wrought alone by man's hand would have any effect on him. I dared not wait to see him return, for I feared to see those weird sisters. I came back to the library and read there till I fell asleep. I was awakened by the Count, who looked at me as grimly as a man can look as he said, "Tomorrow, my friend, we must part. You return to your beautiful England, I to some work which may have such an end that we may never meet. Your letter home has been dispatched. Tomorrow I shall not be here, but all shall be ready for your journey. In the morning come the Zagani, who have some labors of their own here, and also come some Slovaks. When they have gone, my carriage shall come for you, and shall bear you to the Borgo Pass, to meet the diligence from Bukovina to Bistrist. But I am in hopes that I shall see more of you at Castle Dracula." I suspected him and determined to test his sincerity. Sincerity. It seems like a profanation of the word to write it in connection with such a monster. So asked him point blank, "Why may I not go tonight?" "Because, dear sir, my coachman and horses are away on a mission." "But I would walk with pleasure. I want to get away at once." He smiled with a soft, smooth, diabolical smile that I knew there was some trick behind his smoothness. He said, "And your baggage?" "I do not care about it. I can send for it some other time." The Count stood up and said with a sweet courtesy which made me rub my eyes, it seemed so real, "You English have a saying which is so close to my heart, for its spirit is that which rules our boyars. Welcome the coming, speed the parting guest. Come with me, my dear young friend. Not an hour shall you wait in my house against your will. Though sad am I at your going, and that you so suddenly desire it. Come. With a stately gravity, he with the lamp preceded me down the stairs and along the hall. Suddenly he stopped. Hark! Close at hand came the howling of many wolves. It was almost as if the sound sprang up from the rising of his hand, just as the music of a great orchestra seems to leap under the baton of the conductor. After a pause of a moment, he proceeded, in his stately way, to the door, drew back the ponderous bolts, unhooked the heavy chains, and began to draw it open. To my intense astonishment, I saw that it was unlocked. Suspiciously, I looked around, but could see no key of any kind. As the door began to open, the howling of wolves without grew louder and angrier. Their red jaws with championing teeth and their blunt-clawed feet, as they leaped, came in through the opening door. I knew then that to struggle at that moment against the Count was useless. With such allies as these at his command, I could do nothing. But still the door continued to slowly open, and only the Count's body stood in the gap. Suddenly it struck me that this might be the moment and means of my doom. I was to be given to the wolves, and at my own instigation. There was a diabolical wickedness in the idea great enough for the Count. And as a last chance I cried out, "Shut the door, I shall wait till morning," and covered my face with my hands to hide my tears of bitter disappointment. With one sweep of his powerful arm, the Count threw the door shut, and the great bolts clanged and echoed through the hall as they shot back into their places. In silence, we returned to the library, and after a minute or two I went to my own room. The last I saw of Count Dracula was his kissing his hand to me, with a red light of triumph in his eyes, and with a smile that Judas in hell might be proud of. When I was in my room and about to lie down, I thought I heard a whispering at my door. I went to it softly and listened. Unless my ears deceived me, I heard the voice of the Count. "Back, back to your own place. Your time is not yet come. Wait, have patience. Tonight is mine. Tomorrow night is yours." There was a low, sweet ripple of laughter. In a rage, I threw open the door and saw without the three terrible women licking their lips. As I appeared, they all joined in a terrible laugh and ran away. I came back to my room and threw myself on my knees. It is then so near the end. Tomorrow, Lord help me, and those to whom I am dear. 30 June, morning. These may be the last words I ever write in this diary. I slept till just before the dawn, and when I woke, threw myself on my knees, for I determined that if death came, he should find me ready. At last I felt that subtle change in the air, and knew that the morning had come. Then came the welcome cockcrow, and I felt that I was safe. With a glad heart, I opened my door and ran down to the hall. I had seen that the door was unlocked, and now escape was before me. With hands that trembled with eagerness, I unhooked the chains and drew the massive bolts. But the door did not move. The door would not move. Despair seized me. I pulled and pulled at the door, and it shook it till, massive as it was, it rattled in its casement. I could see the bolt shot. It had been locked after I left the Count. Then a wild desire took me to obtain that key at any risk, and I determined then and there, to scale the wall again and gain the Count's room. He might kill me, but death now seemed the happier choice of evils. Without a pause, I rushed up to the east window and scrambled down the wall. As before, into the Count's room. It was empty, but that was as I had expected. I could not see a key anywhere, but the heap of gold remained. I went through the door in the corner and saw the winding stair and along the dark passage to the old chapel. I knew well enough where to find the monster I sought. The great box was in the same place and close against the wall, but the lid was laid on it, not fastened down, but with the nails all ready in their places to be hammered home. I knew I must reach the body for the key, so I raised the lid and laid it back against the wall. And then I saw something which filled my very soul with horror. There lay the Count, but looking as if his youth had been half renewed. For his white hair and mustache were changed to dark iron gray. His cheeks were fuller, and the white skin seemed ruby red underneath. The mouth was redder than ever, for on the lips were gouts of fresh blood, which trickled from the corners of the mouth and ran over the chin and neck. Even the deep, burning eyes seemed set against swollen flesh, for the lids and pouches underneath were bloated. It seemed as if the whole awful creature were simply gorged with blood. He lay like a filthy leech, exhausted with his repletion. I shuddered as I bent over to touch him, and every sense in me revolted at the contact. But I had to search, or I was lost. The coming night might see my own body a banquet in a similar way to those horrid three. I felt all over the body, but no sign could I find of the key. Then I stopped and looked at the Count. There was a mocking smile on the bloated face, which seemed to drive me mad. This was the being I was helping to transfer to London, where perhaps for centuries to come he might, amongst its teeming millions, satiate his lust for blood, and create a new and ever-winding circle of semi-demons to batten on the helpless. The very thought drove me mad. A terrible desire came upon me to rid the world of such a monster. There was no lethal weapon at hand, but I seized a shovel which the workman had been using to fill the cases, and lifting it high, struck, with the edge downward, at that hateful face. But as I did so, the head turned, and the eyes fell full upon me. with all their blaze of basilisk horror. The sight seemed to paralyze me, and the shovel turned in my hand and glanced from the face, merely making a deep gash above the forehead. The shovel fell from my hand across the box, and as I pulled it away, the flange of the blade caught the edge of the lips of the lid, which fell over again, and hid the horrible thing from my sight. The last glimpse I had was of his bloated face, blood-stained and fixed with a grin of malice, which would have held its own in the nethermost hell. I thought and thought what should be my next move, but my brain seemed on fire. I waited with a despairing feeling growing up over me. As I waited, I heard in the distance a Romani song sung by merry voices coming closer, and through their song the rolling of heavy wheels and the cracking of whips. The Zagani and the Slovaks, of whom the Count had spoken, were coming. With a last look around and at the box which contained the vile body, I ran from the place and gained the Count's room, determined to rush out at the moment the door should be opened. With strained ears, I listened and heard downstairs the grinding of the key in the great lock and the falling back of the heavy door. There must have been some other means of entry, or someone had a key for one of the locked doors. Then there came the sound of many feet tramping and dying away in some passage, which sent up a clanging echo. I turned to run down towards the vault, where I might find the new entrance, but at the moment there seemed to come a violent puff of wind, and the door to the winding stair blew with a shock that set the dust from the lintels flying. When I ran to push it open, I found that it was hopelessly fast. I was again a prisoner, and the net of doom was closing round me more closely. As I write, there is in the passage below a sound of many tramping feet, and the crash of weights being set down heavily. Doubtless the boxes, which, with their freight of earth. There is a sound of hammering, and it is the box being nailed down. Now I can hear the heavy feet tramping again along the hall, with many other idle feet coming behind them. The door is shut, and the chains rattle. There is a grinding of the key in the lock. I can hear the key withdraw. Then another door opens and shuts. I hear the creaking of lock and bolt. Hark! In the courtyard and the rocky wall and the rocky way, the roll of heavy wheels, the crack of whips, and the chorus of the Zagani as they pass into the distance. I am alone in the castle with those awful women. Faugh! Mina is a woman, and there is naught in common. They are devils of the pit. I shall not remain alone with them. I shall try to scale the castle wall farther than I have yet attempted. I shall take some of the gold with me, lest I want it later. I may find a way from this dreadful place, and then away for home, away to the quickest and nearest train, away from this cursed spot, from this cursed land, where the devil and his children still walk with earthly feet. At least God's mercy is better than that of these monsters, and the precipice is steep and high. At its foot a man may sleep as a man. Goodbye, all. Mina. I think I'm going to stop reading there. We made some good progress today. Finished chapter 4. We read chapters 2 to 4. So I think that's good. I hope everybody enjoyed the reading. We can talk a little bit about it if you guys want. I feel like yeah, no problem. I'm glad you're enjoying it. Dracula is one of those texts for me that is it's deeply haunting, and it's reminiscent of just how a lot of there's a lot of manipulation going on a lot in the text. Obviously, Dracula is a master manipulator to Jonathan Harker, and then later to others. And it's I hate to say interesting, but Bram Stoker is really good at writing Dracula as a manipulator and a monster. And we talked a bit earlier about how the story is very much written around. It's written by an Englishman about an immigrant who's a monster, and do with that what you will. There's a lot of politics that goes into it. There's a lot of ideas about race and nationalities that goes into it, and it's an old book, so keep that in mind. So yeah. Anyway, I hope that you guys have a great night. And I will see you guys later. I think that I will try to find someone for us to raid before signing off. Who is online that we can raid? Yeah, no problem. Thank you for coming, and thank you for being here. I deeply appreciate everyone who comes and hangs out with me while I read and ramble about literature. So, thank you very much. Let's raid Maple Fae. Let's see how she's doing. Raid. Good night, Jonas. Good night, everybody. We're gonna raid Maple Fae in just a second. As soon as I type in the name. Okay. I will see you guys later in the week. Have a good night. Bye.